What's up, everybody? It's your coach Jaron here with Forge, and today we're going to be going over the single kettlebell overhead press. Now, I love pressing overhead with barbells. I believe that the standing strict press is one of the best tests of full body strength, and I prefer it to the bench press in most scenarios. The problem with this lift, though, is that it's not a great fit for many people. This is because they simply lack the overhead mobility to do the lift in a safe way. Because of this, I'm not able to program a barbell overhead press often for many people, but this doesn't mean that pressing overhead is inherently unsafe and isn't something that people can benefit from. This is where the kettlebell overhead press comes into play. Pressing with a kettlebell offers several distinct advantages over the barbell. With a barbell overhead press, your hands are locked in a fixed position because of the nature of the bar. This means that the amount of mobility that you have to get overhead with a barbell can be problematic for many people. With the kettlebell, because the weight is independent in both arms, even if you're pressing with two kettlebells, your wrist is able to rotate as you go up towards that overhead position. This allows your shoulder to operate in a much more natural and healthy manner than a barbell does. The other advantage is that with the weight being on one side, we're also getting the balance of bracing and of core strength from having to stabilize as we press on one side of the body. Even if we're pressing with two kettlebells, both hands are still able to articulate independently. So if you're like me and you have different levels of mobility or different levels of mileage in one shoulder versus the other, you're still able to train an overhead shoulder press motion, but allow each shoulder to work through the range of motion that it's able to use in a healthy way. For all of these reasons, let's learn the kettlebell overhead press today. To perform the single kettlebell press, we must first clean the bell up into the rack position. For this reason, if you haven't already watched my video on the single kettlebell clean and on the rack position and the details of that, I highly suggest you start there, because getting stronger with heavier bells, if you can't properly bring them into the rack position, is a recipe for issues and injury down the road. Since you do already know those things and you have watched that video, let's begin with the mechanics of the press. We'll start by first cleaning the bell up into the rack position. Notice that I have a straight line between my wrist and my forearm, and the bell is resting across the L of my hand with the handle diagonal across the palm. In the rack position, my elbow is down against my side, my knuckles are facing up, and my thumb is pointed back towards my collarbone. This will be the start and end point of every rep of the overhead press. To initiate the press, let's make sure that we're first squeezing the glutes to keep the hips nice and neutral and stable. We've got our obliques engaged on both sides, and we're simply going to drive straight up, allowing the wrist to rotate as we press. In this overhead position, the arm should be fully locked out, the tricep should be flexed, the shoulder blade should be packed. To come back down, we're going to rotate down into that rack position again. So for a few reps, you'll notice that as I go through that range of motion, I don't allow the bell to flop back into my wrist. And at the top stable position, I'm maintaining that same alignment through my hand with the bell across the palm diagonally. It's not changing position at all. It's ending nice and tight into my elbow. And every rep, the elbow is coming down towards the hip. If through performing this exercise you notice discrepancies between your right arm and your left arm, then I highly suggest letting your weaker arm be the lead arm in your sets with the kettlebell press. That means if my left arm, which for me is the case, has a more difficult time going overhead or is maybe not quite as strong as the right arm, I'm going to start with my left arm on every set. So that way I'm training the weaker arm when I'm the most fresh and training the more dominant arm with a little bit of fatigue. I'm going to let my weaker arm be the one that sets the pace for my intensity and my volume, which means if I can only press a 28 kilogram bell with my left arm, but I can press a 32 with my right, I'm going to train to the degree of my left and let that arm catch up. This is something that may take a little while for the two arms to balance out, or maybe you don't have an issue at all. But either way, you will notice some differences from left to right, and I suggest taking that non-dominant hand and letting it lead the pace for the dominant hand so that those imbalances can correct themselves over time.